right now I want to talk to you about variation. All of these, there's direct variation, inverse variation, joint variation. All of those mean is that when you're taking two values, variables, situations, whatever, there's a connection between them, and that connection is a number that does not change at all. For example, when I gave the example of renting movies at Blockbuster, if you want to compare how much money you've spent at Blockbuster compared to how many videos you've rented, that is a direct relationship. Unless, of course, you buy some side item, that would change that a little bit. But if all I did was rent videos, then I could figure out how much money I'd spent deciding on or depending on how many videos I had rented. If I know they're all $3 a piece, that $3 is very important. 10 videos would mean I spent $30. 20 videos would mean $60. 100 videos would mean $300. That 3 is that constant value that holds that relationship between the two. So that would be what we call a direct relationship. Now sometimes there's an inverse relationship or inverse variation, where as one goes up, the other goes down. We'll get to that in just a moment. But right now, let's talk about a direct variation. As one value increases, the other does too, because they are directly related to each other. One goes down, the other goes down. This is shown by, minimal example would be y equals kx. K is that number that holds them together, that compares the two. Y and x are your variables. So this just means that y, to be directly related, y is equal to some number times x. Our job is going to be to find that number and then apply it to our problem. So let's look at what we're talking about. Here's a question. Y varies directly as the square of x. All right, hold on a second. It's not quite the same. Y varies directly. Now, varies directly means it's equal to some number. We don't know what it is, and we're always going to call it k. Times, in this case it was x. But here it says the square of x. When you see directly, you mean times. So this is how I write it as I read it. Y varies equals k. Directly means times the square of x squared. And that k is a little funny looking. Okay, so now they're going to give me more information so I can figure out what that k is. If y is 32 when x is 4, okay, y is 32 and x is 4 squared. It says find x, we'll get to that in a minute. Use this information to plug it in and help you find k. Well, 4 squared is 16. Divide both sides by 16, and k is 2. Yay! That's not my final answer, because that's not what the question is asking, but that's going to help me get the answer to my question. Here's the question. Find x when y is 18. Now, this is step number 1. Very, very important that you write step number 1. Step number 1, and I'm going to put it over here. Write the equation using k. Now that came out kind of funny. Write the equation using k. K is very, very important. I'll even take that one out there. All right, step 2. Plug in values to solve. I can't spell the word solve. For k. We just did that. We plugged in the values they gave us, and we solved for k. Final. plug in k and new values to answer the question. Running out of room. All right, so we've done step 1. We've done step 2. Now I need step 3. All right, step 3 says plug in k and the new values to answer the question. Plug them in where? This is why step 1 is very important. That is my equation that applies to all of this. I know what k is. It says find x when y is 18. All right, y is 18, k is 2, and I'm looking for x. I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And I found x squared. I don't want x squared. I want to, where'd it go? Find x. I'm looking to find x. So how do I get rid of a squared? I do the inverse of squaring, which is take the square root of both sides. I'll use green. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. The square root of x squared, the square root and the squared cancel each other out, and I am left with x. The square root of 9 is 3. However, the rule is when you take the square root of both sides, you cannot lose one of your possible answers. X squared, there's actually 2 numbers that when you square them, you get 9. 3 works, and so does -3. So I can't lose that -3 possibility. So I'm going to write plus or minus 3. And that's my final answer. All right, so I have a few little things going on here. Y varies directly. Means I'm going to write y equals k times, directly means times, the square of x, so I wrote x squared. Number 2, plugged in the values to solve for k. They told me y is 32 and x is 4. I plugged them in and I solved for k. Step 3 is to now take k and your new values, plug them into the equation, and solve for whatever they're asking. In this case, they were asking for x. Now, that's a direct variation, but like I said earlier, not everything is a direct variation. Sometimes when one value goes up, the other value goes down. They have an inverse relationship. That's why we call it an inverse variation. Your basic equation of an inverse variation is y is equal to some number divided by x instead of times. Inverse means you're going to divide. So, here's our question for this one. If y varies inversely as x, okay, I'm just having a great video, aren't I? Dropping everything, messing up, can't spell, oh well. If y varies inversely, all right, let's write this down. Y varies means right equals k, because k is that some number that I have to solve for. Inversely means I am dividing as x. So x is what I'm dividing by. There you go. There's your equation. Step 1 was write the equation of the variation. And there's my equation. Now, step 2 is to plug in some of the values because we need to solve for k. Y is equal to 3 when x is equal to 25. Y is equal to 3 when x is equal to 25. Solve for k. Yep. K is being divided by 25. So the opposite of dividing by 25 would be to multiply. Ooh, I shouldn't have said opposite. The inverse. 25. These 25s will cancel, and I am left with k is equal to 75. But I'm not done yet, because that's not the question. The question did not say find k. The question says find y when x is 10. So I'm going to plug in the k, which is 75, and I'm going to plug in the 10 for x, and let's see what happens. Y equals k, which is 75, x, which is 10, and I divide. Really, I could do 2 things. I could reduce my fraction, which would be to divide everything by 5. If I divide everything by 5, let's see, 10 divided by 5 is 2. 75 divided by 5 is 15. So that's one way to write my answer. The other way would be, you just want to plug it into a calculator. 75 divided by 10 is 7.5. Either one of those is perfectly acceptable. A, I wrote my equation. It was an inverse, so I had to write it as a fraction. I plugged in the two values and figured out what k was. Then I plugged k and my new value in and solved for whatever variable they were looking for. Now, these were pretty clear-cut. The first one was, it varies directly as the square of x, so that was a little twist. This one is pretty consistent with inverse variation. It's just y varies inversely as x. But sometimes the questions are a little bit more complicated than that. So I want to give you one more, which would be right here. If y varies directly as x and inversely as the square of z, oh my goodness, write it as you read it. Y varies equals k. K is some number. Directly means times x. And inversely, ding, 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 the second that you see that word, you now stop and you write a division symbol, because it's divide. Inversely means divide. As the square, not square root, square of z. Z to the second power. I've written my equation. Step 1, write your equation. Step 2, plug in the values that they give you, and it's always going to be in this order. Okay? So the next values they give me are what I'm going to plug in because I want to solve for k. So y is a -5. I don't know k. X is 10. And z is 2. But don't forget, we're squaring it. All right? -5 equals k times 10 over 4. I am going to multiply both sides by 4. When I multiply both sides by 4, be very careful. It's kind of easy to see on the left I have a -20. But what happens here is that this 4 gets canceled with that 4, and it's not there anymore. So all I have left is k times 10. Hope you can see that. It's not too low. Divide by 10, and we get k is -2. All right, last step. Plug k and your new values, not any of these old ones, the new values in, and solve for what they're asking. Let's find out what they're asking. Let's continue. Find. When you see that word find, that's the last step that we're going to work on. Find y. So I'm looking for y when x is 5. Well, wait, I know k is -2 times x, which is 5. Got that right there. Divide by z, which is 5, squared. Let's make some sense out of this. -2 times 5 is -10. 5 squared is 25. And again, I could and should at least, let me write it right here, reduce your fraction, which again, we divide both sides, both top and bottom by 5, and I get -2 over 5. Or, if you want to change it to a decimal, you would have a -0.4. So, we talked about direct variation, inverse variation, and sometimes you'll have a mix of them. But there's 3 examples. Hope that helps, and good luck.